So let me set up this clip real quick. This is from the Jimmy Dore Show live stream several months ago, and Jimmy received this question asking how Americans can remain optimistic when the oligarchy is so obvious and in your face. And, well, Jimmy came out of nowhere with all these philosophical quotes. And at first he looked a little scared to have said something, but then he just kind of went on with it. And then he talked about himself and his anxiety. And a lot of people asked everybody at the Jimmy Dore Show if they could clip that out of the live stream and put it to the main Jimmy Dore Show channel, but they never did. And that's one of the reasons why I'm uploading it to my channel. But I'm also uploading it because I didn't fully understand everything he was saying. So maybe you guys can check it out and help me understand some of it.
Why should Americans have optimism if the oligarchy we live in is so obvious now? Boy, let me read that to you. Thank you, Cindy. Here's Lewis again. Why should Americans have optimism, Jimmy, if the oligarchy we live in is so obvious now?
Why should we what?
Why should Americans have optimism?
Because it's not as much fun to not have it. It's really a heavy deal. Unless you can accept, your impending death, there's also something freeing about that. It's up. Everybody's got to do their own thing. I accept that there is no death. That we live forever, and that nothing really matters. Nothing really does matter. I know that sounds funny, but nothing really does matter. Look at people 50 years ago. There were people worried about shit, and they're dead. You ever see, like Eckhart Tolle says this thing? I looked at a picture the other day of San Francisco, and there's all these people in the street, and they're all hurrying. And then I saw a picture of San Francisco from this week, and it's the same thing. All these people hurry, and those people in the first place, they're all dead. Where'd they go? Where were they trying to get to? Did they get there? And now there's a whole new people just trying to get. And so there is no place to go. Time doesn't exist. Time and space are the same thing. Isn't that crazy to think about? And everything is happening at once. So that's how I get through it, is that like when you die, it's only bad for the people alive. Doesn't bother them. You're dead. You ever hear when people have a near-death experience? Guess what happens? They don't fear death anymore. So why do we still fear every single motherfucker who has a near-death experience? They don't come back and go, holy shit, you don't want to go there. They don't say that. They're like, oh my God, whatever you do, fucking hang on by your fingernails. Don't let go of life because it's horrible. That's not what they say. They go, oh, it was blissful. It was great. I felt the oneness. I realized how ridiculous Joe Rogan talks about doing that shit on DMT and all. I'm afraid to do that. But I have taken low doses of psilocybin mushrooms. And, you can have glimpses. But Eckhart Tolle was one of these guys who was miserable. And he had a lot of anxiety. And I actually have an anxiety disorder that was treated 15 years ago. And it's where I had this like knot in my chest that felt like 1,000 pounds being pushed on me. And he was so miserable that he couldn't sleep. And I've had that. So in the middle of the night, he got up and he looked in the mirror and he said to himself, I can't live with myself anymore. And then he had his next thought was, wait a minute. Am I one person or two? Who's the I that can't live with myself? Who am I and who is myself? And so that pain that he was in caused him to have that thought, and that thought somehow jarred his brain, and he became awakened like a Buddhist, like a Zen master, like that, because that's how it can happen. It happens like that to him. And when he woke up the next day, he looked at the teapot and he could see it vibrating, because it is. Isn't that weird? And he was happy, and his thoughts had slowed down. He was thinking less thoughts because 90% of our thoughts are just repetitive, and we're thinking it over and over and over, and we think our thoughts are real and we identify with them. So he had stopped identifying with his thoughts. He'd stopped thinking thoughts, and he was just present. I know this is all heavy duty stuff, but that's what I want. I want to be so miserable that I have a spontaneous awakening, so I don't have to go to a cave and meditate.
Jalen wants to know, do you still deal with anxiety?
Yes. And it's always the worst in the morning. So when I would wake up in the morning, it would be this like this, all this shit that didn't get done, I got to do, that I'll never get done, and I'm going to be a failure, and oh my God, it was just crushing when I would wake up in the morning. Crushing. And so you just get up and start distracting yourself or take a Xanax and go back to bed. I've done both of those things. And I realized that was just mental conditioning, that I was brought up that way, to always be afraid, always be worrying about the future, to see the world as hostile. And when I can convince myself the world isn't hostile, the world actually isn't. So the world is actually what you think of it. Turns out what you think of it has a lot to do with what the world actually is. If you expect the world to meet your needs, it probably will. If you are afraid it won't, and you come from a place of lack, you'll have lack. I've experienced that in my own life. I've had lack and I've had abundance. And both those things came from a shift in thinking. So I still have anxiety, but I've learned how to deal with it a lot better. When I wake up in the morning, I don't do that repetitive thinking anymore. And I have to tell myself, I don't have to do anything today. My life already worked out. And I could just drink coffee and pet my dog if I want today. So I just have to tell myself that for like a half an hour. Like, I don't have to do anything. I don't have to. And it just kind of takes all that edge off for me. And then I can do what I feel like doing. Okay, that's my little trick.
Are you an atheist?
So I don't believe in an external God. If that's what I don't believe there's an invisible man in the sky who controls things. There's a oneness of energy which we are all a part of, that is infinite. Life is everlasting. Birth is the opposite of death. There is no opposite of life. So, the way you truly love another person is when you recognize yourself in that person. When you recognize that there is no separation. And that whatsoever you do to the least of my brothers, that's what you do unto me. It's what you do unto yourself. And that's true love. So I haven't gotten to that place. That's a big leap still. But that's what real love is. So I think, I don't like to say, I don't believe in an external God. How about that? But I would say I am spiritual in the sense that I recognize the oneness of all things. Next question.
So yeah, I understood some of that, but then other parts I can't really wrap my head around. Time and space is the same thing, and then everything is happening at once. I've dealt with anxiety for pretty much all my life. I didn't really get any medical help until I was around a teenager or so. So, I'm still trying to figure out how to live life and how to live life in society, not just live life yourself to make yourself happy. It's just, and then when you throw this into the equation, it's just like, I don't know, how do you function in life and in society and then have this in your head? I have other stuff in my head that's just constant, but then thinking about or even understanding this sort of stuff. And Jimmy also mentioned Joe Rogan going on ayahuasca or something like that. And Joe actually said you should do something like that, but out in the wilderness, so you're at one with nature. And that's usually what people try and talk about when they say, I'm part Native American. They try and make it seem like they're more one at nature or whatever. And then, same with hippies. So people gave hippies a lot of bad names and everything. But really, to be at one with nature and to see, well, I'm not really fully at one. I don't really understand how we're all the same, but I still recognize that like animals and other things are still, like living things. And just people are just like, oh, whatever, F that. That's a cat or something. You know what I mean? So I don't know. I'm just trying to wrap my head around so much at once, and it's just not happening.